Hey everyone, it's Brett, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Stack, where today I am sitting down with author Virginia Evans for her new book, The Correspondent. This is just an absolutely beautiful book that I fell in love with and shed more than a few tears for. So, a little bit about Virginia. She attended James Madison University for her bachelor's in English literature. After starting a family, she went back to school for her Master's of Philosophy in Creative Writing at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, where she had the good fortune to study under Carlo Gebler, Ewan McNamee, Claire Keegan, Harry Clifton, and Kevin Power. She now lives in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with her husband Mark, her two children, Jack and May, and her red Labrador, Bridget. So enjoy this episode of Behind the Stack. I'm thrilled to be sitting down with Virginia Evans today, whose beautiful new book, Correspondent. I was saying to her before we started, I got a copy of this and last week read it. Well, I got to the weekend and it was I think Friday night, and I had been, I was down to like the last 50 pages, and I came into the bedroom and my husband's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "I'm reading this book." And I just like it just is really like touching me and moving me. And he was like, "Okay." So cut to next day, I'm reading the rest of the book in my office, like audibly sobbing, like audibly like doing like that, like when you kind of can't get your breath. And so I finished, and he was in his office next door. He's like, "What is the matter with you?" And I was like, "It's like, is it that book? That's still that book?" And I was like, "It's still the book, and it's really." So anyway, I reached out to you immediately, as you know, and I'm letting everyone know, because I reached out to you on Instagram because I was like, I have to talk to her. And I don't usually do that kind of thing so quickly. I'm very kind of organized. I look weeks in advance. But first of all, kudos. And I'm so happy to your marketing team that they even reached out to me. So I got my hands on it. And I'm so happy that you said, okay, I can totally sit down with you next week. So thank you to everyone involved. And most of all, for you, for A, writing it, and B, sitting down with me today.
Oh yeah.
That very long prologue.
I'm so happy to be here. It's so fun.
So before we launch into the book, I just had some questions. So about you and about your journey in terms of getting to this point, because I know it's been a journey. But you got your bachelor's in English literature at James Madison.
That's right.
And then you had a small detour where you started a family, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Small detour. Had all my
No.
kids.
Did you and your husband meet at college?
Yeah, we met in undergrad. We didn't marry right out, but we married young. And I mean, that could have been a huge mistake because we were so young, but it wasn't. And he is wonderful. I mean, the book is dedicated to him because I couldn't have done the last 20 years if he hadn't been sort of like over here pushing me, pushing me and supporting. Yes. And I mean, I was always working odd jobs, but he was really holding down the fort for us. But yeah, we met in undergrad, and then we kind of, after a few years, got married, and then we've kind of had a long in between. So I've been kind of writing all the way through.
Wow. And then when in that did you go back? How old were your kids when you went? Because you then got a master's in philosophy and creative writing at
Yeah.
Trinity School in Dublin. Wait, so
Yeah,
explain this to me.
Yeah.
Explain this major, first of all, philosophy and creative writing. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's their, what is it here? An MFA in the States.
Okay.
It's that.
Okay.
It's just the same.
Okay.
It's kind of the same. It's like a, writing workshop degree, but it was a crazy story. We had been married. We'd been married for, I guess, about 10 years at this point, or 8 or 10 years. Our children were 3 and 6. And, my husband had this career he wasn't really wild about. He was selling medical equipment. It wasn't well suited to him. I was always working kind of day jobs. And then so I'd get up in the 4:30 or 5, kind of set my alarm. I would get up and then I would write until it was time to like wake the children up, go to school, go to work, whatever the thing was in the various years of all this. And so we were at a point that we were just, we were happy and our children were healthy and we loved each other, but we just hated what it was. Like, he was working all these hours, didn't love his job. I was slogging and sort of like tucking writing, which is what I've always done and which is what I love to do in these early morning hours, like in the dark, and then going to do jobs I didn't want to do. And, we sort of had this moment where, we sort of sat down and I said, why are we doing, what are we doing? Like, why are we doing, how did we get here? And we started to pick apart, like, we bought a house, and then it was like a dog, and then a kid, and then a bigger car, and then another bigger, slightly bigger house, and a little bit of a nicer car, and then, just kind of like those little
Steps.
incremental increases. And but to what, for what? It just felt so, it felt like you jump into this river and the river's current just takes you away. And is that your whole life? And we
Right.
just had this moment where I remember, and I wrote an essay about this that was published in the Irish Times. But we had this moment where he was putting the children to bed and I was downstairs and I was cleaning the toys and cleaning at the end of the day. And he came downstairs and he just sort of fell into the couch. And I said, let's move abroad. Like, let's sell the house, quit our jobs, give everything away, sell it to Goodwill, take the kids out of school, let's move abroad. And he kind of said, how would we do that? And I had already sort of been looking at writing programs abroad in English speaking countries. I knew he wouldn't go for it if it was like, we have to learn a foreign language and with our two small children. So it is a long journey, but we did it. It was the craziest, most like countercultural thing we could have done. All of our friends later told us they thought we were insane to make that decision. And it's kind of saying, it's kind of forfeiting everything you've like acquired, or like
Yeah.
by burning it all down, you're sort of saying, okay, I'm like deciding that this isn't our top value. What is our top value? And so then it was like, we want to relearn each other. We want to go somewhere together. We
Mm.
want to, I mean, truly like wanted to live outside of America. We had traveled and just found European culture to be more suitable for our family. And so we lived in Ireland that year, and it was,
And all of us now.
I know, I think everybody does now, but yeah, it was just such a, and that year when we lived in Ireland, it changed our lives. Changed our lives.
That is so amazing. My God. I mean, first of all, how brave. And second of all, just, what a leap of faith. And it also is a testament to the both of you and your relationship that you're like, because many relationships couldn't stand that. It would be like the stress of it would be the end of it. So
Yeah,
that, yeah, no, I'm sure. I
yeah.
mean, what do they say? Even like they'll say some of the most stressful points of a relationship are either moving, a death in the family, like a death of a parent, or children, all of those like big tent
Yeah.
poles. But like you took a lot of them at once and said, let's try to do all of these things at the
All of
same
them at one
time.
time. It's true. And I mean, we sort of have this amazing, we've always had this sort of amazing symbiosis, my husband and me, and my husband and I, my husband and me. I'm still not great at
The
that.
both of you.
Yeah, the two of us, the unit. And he's a very sort of even, practical, uh, just reasonable human being. He's so reasonable, he's so kind, he's very gentle. And I am just always going in a thousand directions, and I am always kind of thinking, we could do this. We could do this.
Mm,
Oh, we could do this. But the amazing thing, and my husband is a true feminist. I mean, the amazing thing is that he has always said, okay, okay, let's try. Let's try. I'll try. He just has given me all the dignity and like all the space to be this like wild thinker. And I mean, I could not have tried again and failed again and tried again with writing for 20 years if I had had a partner that was sort of like, what are you doing? And we could
right.
be making money somewhere.
Give up his hobby.
Yeah, give up your
Right.
hobby. I really do think that's probably what a lot of people are dealing with. And if it had been that, A, I wouldn't have married him, and B, I wouldn't have lasted this long, probably.
How amazing. How amazing. It's also that kind of thing, a little bit of opposites attract and
Yes.
keeping it, because I have very much the same, and you and I seem very similar, and our husbands seem very similar. Okay, so you went through this process, and so we were talking beforehand. So you had a number of things that you had, the kind of stop and start of things that hadn't got published. You went through quite a bit before landing on this, correct?
That's right. Yeah, the kind of the long story short is, I had kind of written a few novels, and then in 2015 I self-published a novel, and it did okay, but I mean mostly I think people I knew bought a lot of copies. I was really I had taken out other books the traditional route, hadn't done well, hadn't even been able to get an agent. And then with this book, I think it's a good book and I liked it, but I we had no money and I needed a new computer.
Mm.
I thought, if I sell enough self-published copies, I can afford to buy a new computer. So that's what I did. My goal was to sell enough copies through the self-publishing process to afford a new computer, and I needed a Mac because I use a Mac, so they're expensive.
Yeah.
um and then after that I wrote another one, and that book really did almost make it. I had an agent with that book, and it kind of fell apart in a really sad way, but that also failed. And then when I was in Trinity, part of my coursework was to be working on a novel or a short story collection, or, whatever your pursuit is. And so I was writing a novel then, and I started it there and kind of finished. It took me probably 2 years to write that book.
Mm.
And that book is how I landed with my current agent. She's wonderful, and she's just exceptional. And I'm so, so thankful for her. And she found me because of that book. And all of this is, every time it's sending out over 100, agent queries and cold calling. I mean, and I didn't know anyone in this industry. I never knew anyone who had been a writer. I really didn't know I didn't know what I was doing. I was like buying the writer's almanac, reading like how to write a query.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like nobody in my family there's just no history of this in my life. And so with that book is a book that I love and I'm really proud of, and I hope someday it comes into the light. But that book didn't sell. She was trying to sell that during COVID. I think it was a hard time to sell a book. And it's a very literary kind of historical, it's kind of a Vietnam era Americana Southern book, which is very much related to my family history. And then after that book wasn't selling, my agent had this amazing way of never telling me this is not working, but sort of like giving me this hope that maybe still this could sell, but maybe you should start working on something else. So I started to write another novel, not The Correspondent. And it was COVID, and we were living in we had come back from Ireland because my father-in-law was sick, and we had to come back because my husband was helping to care for him. And it was just a tough time. It was just a really tough time. And we came back, and so we were living in this little rental, and it was one of these new 90s, kind of like 90s 2000s build, and it's open concept, and there's like not a door. I mean, there's nowhere you can it was just horrible. I had nowhere to go, and my children were, they're kids, they're great, but like so always just right here.
Yeah.
And there was nowhere to go. And so we had this closet, and I shoved the clothes around, and I shoved a desk inside the closet, this tiny desk inside this tiny, horrible closet at this rental.
You were Harry Potter, basically.
Yeah, really, truly. And I would get up at 4:30 and I would write, and I had started something else. And then I just was like, I was depressed and sad to be back from Ireland. I didn't want to come back. It was really painful. I was in such a low place. And then I scrapped the thing I was writing, and I started writing The Correspondent. And it was not for anyone. I was not going to give it to my agent. I think I was just like trying to get everything out of my body that was hard and sad. I think it's probably why I had the courage to do things like take on the voice of Joan Didion or things like that, because I wasn't planning on showing it to anyone. And I don't even know how my agent Hillary got her hands on it, but she did. I think she probably just said, "Send me a little bit just for fun," and then she thought I should try to take it to the next step. So I did, and then at first when she took it out to sell, it really wasn't getting any interest at all. And then all of a sudden, one editor was interested, and that made another editor be interested, and it ended up being Amy Einhorn who bought the book.
Wow. Okay, so now we're at that point of like, do you have an elevator pitch for The Correspondent? Okay, awesome.
I'm working on this.
Sure.
I'm trying to workshop this. The Correspondent is Sybil Van Antwerp. That she is the Correspondent. And this book is a puzzle. To me, it's a puzzle. And it's when the puzzle is finished at the end, you have a portrait of Sybil, but all the letters are like the pieces of this puzzle that you're kind of putting together. And they're not coming in order, but it's sort of throughout the book. I think she's coming into like a clearer and clearer relief. And then I hope, and it's all in letters. I think I can say that. And
Oh
that's
yeah,
a big
yeah.
part of the book, but it's through these letters that she writes and receives. And by the end of the book, you come away and I think you know who she is. But I think what makes the book makes you turn the pages is that you're trying to complete this puzzle and get the clear picture and understand.
It's interesting hearing you describe it that way, and it's so true in terms of a puzzle because, like you said, it's an epistolary novel, which I want to ask you about that and how that decision came up for you to start with. I'm just curious why that format. I have to say I loved that format for this, and it had been so long since I had read a book. I actually was going through and I was like, what was the last book I read? And I was like, okay, it wasn't The Color Purple. It wasn't,
What was
like
it?
Lily is.
No?
No, I think it really was.
Yeah, please. I'd love to know.
Janice Hallett, who wrote this book called The Appeal, and then she's got a series of there are these mysteries, but they're all done through correspondence between the people in the town,
Okay.
and that's the way it's done. But
Okay.
that was and she has a series of them, but that was a while ago. So it had been a while. But yeah, what made you choose this format?
That's a great question. There's this, I think it's the Zadie Smith originally said this, but she said, I'm always writing the book that I want to read. That's like what kind of is what I want to, is what I'm writing is what I want to read. And I always think about that. And that has always been true for me when I've started a new project. And I had finished reading 84 Charing Cross Road. Have you read that?
No, but
Oh,
I
it's
know
great.
it.
It'll take you an hour and a half. It's very short. It's letters. It's letters that cover, I think they go over about 25 years, but they're very short and it's just very few, but it's this correspondence between this academic in New York City and a bookseller in London, I believe. And I had finished reading that book and I closed it and I wanted it to never end, but it was complete. The story is perfect and it's complete, but I wanted that. And I had also just finished reading The Uncommon Reader by Alan Bennett. Do you know that one?
Yeah, no, I know, but I haven't read it. No.
Okay.
You're giving me all these great.
Oh yeah, and these are both really short, like very quick reads. But and that book is not epistolary, but it's kind of got a similar energy of, I don't know, was I wanting just to like feel something, but not like sensational or too dark, or I just wanted to like feel something. And that was what I was wanting from and was getting from those books. And so when I read 84 Charing Cross Road with the letters, I always have this kind of psychotic thought, like I could do this when I I'll read like Grapes of Wrath and I'm like, I can do this. It's insanity. Like I think that's kind of an insanity. But I read her book. It's a classic. It's just like not even touchable. But I thought I can do this.
So then my next question is in regards to Sybil. Let's talk about her for a second. Sybil was I'm going to say some points, but I almost don't want to reveal too much because some gets revealed. But we know that she's had 3 children. She's a divorced mom. She's in her early 70s. She has a brother. All of these people begin to get revealed through the course of the correspondence that she has, which was also so interesting because I would find myself going back and saying, wait, again, it's such an interesting way to read something if you're not used to this format, because you're just getting what's going back and forth and slowly start to parse out what's happening as the correspondence continues between these people, which is really kind of cool. It's so funny because I was reading in some reviews and different people were talking about how prickly that Phyllis is as Sybil, not Phyllis, Sybil. And yet I didn't necessarily find her that way. I don't know what that says about me. And part of it is, like you said, by the end, everything of who she is makes so much sense. But also, I just kind of looked at her as, she had spirit. That's the way I viewed her. To be perfectly honest, she also reminded me a little bit of my mother-in-law, who is absolutely prickly. So she seemed tame in comparison. And I thought of my mother-in-law a lot when I was going through this. In fact, I was like, I have to send this to my mother-in-law because she is a woman who writes letters. She does all those things. Are you a letter writer?
I am. Yeah.
You are?
I have always been. And I have sent, I've sent some crazy letters, but I have received the most beautiful I mean, you can't, it says this at one point in the book, people are always surprised to find that people write back. I mean, people write back. I think it's such a novelty now. I mean, it was such an institution and such a necessity, until it wasn't. And then it's
Yes.
all sort of been abandoned. And I try not to read reviews, but I see some of the kind of conversations online sometimes, like through Instagram, and some people will say, I mean, most people will say, I've never written a letter, or I can't think of the last time I wrote a letter. And I think, to me, it's, for instance, I wrote to Ann Patchett like 10 years ago when I read Commonwealth, and we've been corresponding ever since. She and I write letters. And the first time I wrote to her, I said, this is what I loved about your book. I write to authors when I love their book, usually. And this is what I loved about your book. This is what moved me, spoke to me. I mean, I wouldn't have written her a letter if I didn't like it, but I did like
Right. Right.
it. And she wrote back, and over the years we've just maintained like an ongoing, I mean, not frequent, not as much as Sybil writes, but just here and there when her books come out, I'll write to her that I liked it or whatever, and she'll write back. And when I had my agent fall through with that hard time before we moved to Ireland, she was really kind to me and helped me sort of navigate some of that. So just people like that. I mean, my husband bought this amazing piece of art for me during COVID for Christmas, and it's this lino cut, and it's of a fishing boat. And the man who does these lino cuts is I think, on the coast of England in Cornwall, and
Mm.
he's like 85. And I mean, this art, you cannot believe how beautiful it is. And we bought it, and he sent it to me, and I wrote to him and I said, I received this as a gift. I think it's stunning. It's like Sybil says, you sort of say what you want to say, you ask a question, it creates an ongoing conversation, and it does. And he wrote back this, I mean, I have all these letters in my, he wrote
I was
back.
going to ask if you save your letters.
Yes, and he said, thank you so much. It means so much to me. And for the first time, I don't have an apprentice, and this is a dying art. And I'm 85 and I'm going to die. And then who will do this? I mean, and there's just so much life out there that I think is fascinating.
Yeah, there's this quote I wanted to read, and it comes late in the book, but I'm not ruining anything. It's Sybil saying, you know, through correspondence, I could find inexplicable relief. I could write to anyone. I could take the time to think through what I wanted to say, practice, rewrite, and get it exactly how I wanted it. It was so much easier for me to write than it was to have a conversation.
Mm.
And then she says later, when I was young, by writing letters, I found a framework that made living easier, and that has never changed. Do you find that at all for yourself?
It makes me emotional.
Yeah, but do you find that?
Yeah, I do. I think I actually do feel that way. I think there's parts of me that are reflected in Sybil. I am a much more able person in social situations than she
Mm,
sort of is, but I have always found that there's a sort of a piece to be able to sit quietly at the desk and write the letter and say exactly what I mean to say. If I want to say something meaningful, if I want to say something that I want this person to really hear me say the right way, I want to write it, and then I want to send it to them so that they can hold it and read it. And like a good example of this is when our graduation from my master's got pushed because of COVID. And when it got rescheduled, it was like a year and a half late. And so
mm.
my husband and I flew back to Dublin for the graduation. And it was, I mean, in the top 5 moments, just sort of things that's ever happened to me. And the dean of students talked about what it was like for master's students whose time in school was waylaid and sort of wrecked and put sideways by COVID, and how we had to move online, and how it was just like so grueling. And he stood up there, and I sat there just weeping because he was putting all these words to the grief I had felt over not only
Mm.
having to cut the program short, but having to leave Ireland and move back to the States, which I was like not prepared to do. And I wrote to him after, and I wrote him this letter, and I told him I sat with it. I wrote notes about what I wanted to say. I thought about it the whole plane ride home. I just thought and thought and thought. And then I sent him this letter. I actually sent him an email because I wanted it to reach him. And he wrote back and said, in my whole life, that is the most generous letter I've ever received. And I just think that's what correspondence is. I mean, when you receive a really well thought out, it's best if it's in your mailbox, but or an email. I mean, the written word. I mean, what's bad? It's time. It's like you can have it forever. I don't know. Something to make.
After my mother, she passed away during COVID, my sister had gone back to clean out her apartment. And she came across a box, and it was filled with letters from my father. And some of them, and I have all of them now, because I actually thought about trying to find some way to record the letters and put pictures of them when they were young together, because it was so interesting, because you have an idea about who this person is based on what you're seeing, and especially with your parents, right? But to see him, my dad, courting her and writing these letters while he was, some of them when he was in the war, some of them after they'd been married, and she was pregnant with my sister. And first of all, his penmanship was so beautiful, because that's the other thing about it too, is looking at a letter and how someone actually, the physical writing
Mhm.
and their penmanship. But he had beautiful penmanship, and he was saying things like, my darling, darling, sweet girl, like when it was not even my wife always, and he'd go through and he'd be like, kiss that child of mine and I'll see you soon. And then, don't be talking to other men while I'm gone. He was playful.
Yeah.
And it was this side of them that I never saw,
Yeah.
because, by the time I grew up, they'd been together for so long. It was, and everything that goes
Sure.
50 plus years of
Sure.
marriage. But it was such a beautiful thing to see. And I showed them to my daughter, and I was like, look at these. And she choked up when she was looking at all of them, because it was just such a, I think it's such a lost art. And there is something so absolutely so beautiful about it. And for people who do it,
Yeah.
I loved hearing that you like the Ann Patchett story, because I wanted to know if, as you went through this, if in fact you did write to authors, and how you decided on who you decided. First of all, I'm like so many people obsessed with Ann Patchett. So I loved that Ann Patchett was one of the authors that she wrote to. And for our listeners and our readers, in the book, Sybil is a big reader. And generally when she's corresponding with people is always asking, what are you reading? Again, which I loved. But how did you make the decision on the authors that she chose to write to?
I would say almost all. I went through and had to make a list of all the books that are referenced in the book, for my team at Crown, and I was sort of looking at the list, and almost every book, I would say, maybe other than 3 or 4, every book has meant something to me, or has
Mm,
been a book that I loved or hated, or but really made like a impact on me. And I think there are certain, I mean, I think it's okay to like mention certain books that are mentioned. The Ann Patchett connection is obvious because it really changed my life to hear from her, and then for her to give me the dignity of an ongoing relationship over the years. And obviously, like, she ended up blurbing the book, which I didn't know about, and I didn't know she had read it, and I didn't know she was going to read it. So I was really
wow.
surprised by that, in a great, I mean, obviously it was like the surprise of a lifetime. But certain books, they all pretty much all meant something to me. And the ones that really get like a pushed to the forefront, like there's a letter late in the book from an author, and this is just a curiosity point, but I could only write from the voice of people who are no longer living. So the only authors that write back are no longer living, but they would have been during the time of the book. So I couldn't write in the voice of,
Mm,
you know, Kazuo Ishiguro or something, because he's still
right.
living, but I was able to write in those other voices because they are not. So that was like a legality thing, which I figured out early on thanks to my mentor. He told me that. Um but the books that really get a prominent position are books that really have meant something to me and have really altered my life or my soul. And the I won't say what the book is, but kind of last book that's referenced is a book that is one of my all-time favorites, and all of my all-time favorite books are mentioned in the
God, I love that so. Yeah, it's one of them. One of them that as I was sitting in my office the other day and was just reading this and sobbing, I looked across at my bookshelf because I was thinking about the books that she was talking about, and there is one of them towards the end that's a massive tome,
Mhm.
and I could see it
Mm.
sitting across from me, which I haven't read it yet. And I know this was a book that was really big on Bookstagram. Like last year, people were doing group reads of it, and somehow I missed all of them.
Yeah.
So it did make me look at that, and I was like, I've got to get on this. And that's again the feeling that the book kind of evoked for me, because, and it's a testament to you and your writing of this character, that she feels so familiar by the end.
Mm.
And because of the intimacy of the letters, you feel like you're kind of prying into someone's life in a way that's different than a normal narrative,
Mhm.
in a way that's telling you or showing you something. You feel so, for anyone who loves the written word and loves stories, to be getting this ongoing back and forth about all of these different kind of books that she's recommending or talking about. It's like, sitting with a good friend who says exactly this. What are you reading? What are you loving? And it's such like a bonus point. I haven't seen a finished copy of the book, but I almost want there to be like, these are all the books that are referenced in the end. Did they do that?
I just got mine.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. Yeah,
Look.
it's beautiful.
But no,
Yeah.
they don't list the books, but I can send it to you.
Yeah, no, I can certainly go back. It's easy enough, but wow. But it was,
Yeah.
and there's also so much about this book, and I don't want to get into specifics. Again, I'm trying to be very general because I think it's about discovery. The one thing I will say, this is not a spoiler, but in the book, her kids get her a kit to what is called the Kindred Project, which is effectively 3andMe, which I loved this. And she does it, and what kind of happens after
Mhm.
she almost reluctantly takes this test. So I don't want to get into what happens
Mhm.
because of that. Have you ever done this? Did you ever do
Okay,
23andMe?
well, I've never done it, but um I wanted to write about it, so I did the free trial.
Okay.
I did it with Ancestry. I did like the free
Okay.
trial of ancestry.com. I didn't take it as far as she takes it, but I just dabbled because I needed to understand, how does the interface work? Like, is there a dashboard? How does this work? It was
Yeah.
amazing. I wanted to keep going, but like budget cuts in my family. But I didn't do it. But I might, once, if this book does well, maybe I'll go back to it.
Well, yeah, you've got to do Ancestry, because I just found out 23andMe went up when they went belly up. And I don't know how Ancestry works. Is it a similar thing? Do you have to?
I mean, I kind of based the Kindred Project on my experience with Ancestry. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's fiction. I mean, I just made up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it was very convincing, and immediately was like, I hadn't even thought of Ancestry, but I was like, oh my God, this whole thing, it's fascinating, especially for a woman like that,
Yeah.
who is pretty much so controlled to do something that's throwing caution to the wind, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah, that the aspect of her engaging with that. I mean, this book was a joy to write. It was so fun, and it was just wonderful. Books I've written felt hard and like a slog, but this was not that way. But that aspect of her story, which, a lot of the book kind of goes back in a way and you learn the past, but then there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now in her life when she's in her 70s. And that aspect was kind of the part that I loved the most, probably.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating thing, I think, just people generally aging, of how somebody who is older is contemplating not only their past, but dealing with so much of what's happening in the present in a world that's changing so rapidly, just technologically, just in terms of everything, the way we talk about everything, the way we talk about problems, the way we talk about mental health, the way we talk about all of it has changed so much, and that we've given words and voice to things that, when people were younger, they would never have had the lexicon for, so to speak. It's
Yes.
a really interesting
Yeah,
thing.
I agree. And you said earlier that Sybil is evocative to you of your mother-in-law, which is also
Yeah,
true for me. And my mother-in-law was like a big inspiration for
that's what I was
Sybil.
going to ask you. Is
I
it someone?
love her. I mean, I love her. It was funny. I was glad what you said that you don't think of her as prickly, because I also don't think of her as prickly. I think of her as very direct,
That's it.
very sort of her generation, and
Yep.
sort of like, I mean, my mother-in-law was raised, kind of in a without a lot of means, very practical. She's the oldest child of 5, and she just I mean, she's not the same as Sybil, and it's not that they're the same, but there's some things about Sybil that I sort of learned that way of being from my mother-in-law, who I love. And I think, to me, when I have heard people refer to her as prickly, or they were really turned off by her at the beginning, that's fair. Everybody, everybody's allowed to.
Yeah.
No book is universal. Um, but I just love that quality in a woman, and I think it's sort of, I mean, you can't, it's really risky to be that way now, and sure, and certainly Sybil needs to learn and grow, and there's things that she says and does that are inappropriate and wrong, and she learn, and in most cases I think she kind of wises up and can say she's sorry, but there's just something very authentic to me about women at that age, not, it's like expectations in the world are changing really fast, and sort of what's appropriate and what you can say and what you can't say, and everything's moving really fast, and I've always felt like I can give way for space to learn and grow, and so
Yeah.
that was, I felt like if Sybil was totally appropriate all the time, I wouldn't really believe I wouldn't really believe.
Well, it would make her soft and sentimental to me in a way that wouldn't earn what comes later.
Mhm.
And so, yeah. And again, like I think of the way it's very much the same. I think of the way my mother-in-law approaches everything. And my mother-in-law is 95.
Mm.
And she, until she was almost 90 years old, would drive from Pennsylvania to, she had a home up in Nova Scotia, and she would drive to Prince Edward Island
Oh,
over a series of days, visiting friends along the way. But that kind of spirit is what's got her to 95.
mhm.
There's been a can-do attitude of, she was never like, well, you won't go to the gym. You dig an irrigation ditch in the backyard and you make it productive. There was no, with everything. That's
Yeah,
how she would approach everything. And so, reading all that, I was like, well, Sybil is this,
they'd
and
be best
it's,
friends.
yeah. And I guess what I would say to anyone going into the book, if they do feel that in the beginning, have patience, because people are willing to change. And that's the other beautiful thing about it, is one of the things about the book is it described it as, this woman's world expanding as she increases in age, and it absolutely does that. And that's the other thing I loved so much. And I'm very aware, again, speaking of one's personal experience, because where you come from at a book, but watching my mother-in-law now at this point in her life, and the parallels, I just think there is a beauty in it. And there's a beauty in that Sybil shows us with life is always continuing, and it's always about discovery, and it's always an adventure. And that's, I think, such a beautiful message of the book, that nothing necessarily has to stop because of one thing
Mm,
or one tragedy or one defining moment. We
right.
can keep going.
That's really beautiful.
So I will just say, for our viewers and our listeners, I'm reluctant to talk even about some specific characters in the book, because I think kind of the beauty of this book in particular, and because it's the way it's written, is discovering these characters for yourself and seeing who they are and who they become. So I don't really want to get into that much. So I'm sorry, but you have to read the book. Or I've heard the audiobook is also amazing, and it's done with a full cast. I
Mhm.
think you had said you had started to hear some of it, and it was great, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I listened to it. It was amazing, and I mean, it's an interesting experience to hear voices put to voices that have only lived inside my body and head, but they did such a beautiful job, and a cast audiobook experience is so fun,
Oh my gosh,
like the
it's
variety,
incredible. Who would be the perfect Sybil to you if you could cast anyone?
like on screen.
Yeah.
Okay, my absolute, what I always saw in my mind was Meryl Streep.
I almost came on today and said, so is Meryl Streep optioned this yet? Has there been option for Meryl Streep?
That's who as soon as I even had the notion of like, when I finished whatever draft was the last draft, and I thought, what if this became a movie? I mean, of course, it's probably won't become a movie, but if it did, and I said in my head, I think Meryl Streep, and I went to my husband and I said, who would it be? And he said Meryl Streep. So it's gotta be.
I think you should write a letter to Meryl Streep and include the book. You know the story about how Ann Patchett had Meryl Streep read Tom Lake?
No,
Do you know the
I don't know the story. Please tell me.
Okay. So I saw Ann Patchett here in Los Angeles, and Kathy Baker was moderating. And so Kathy Baker said to her, and I'm going to try to do my little Ann Patchett, but Kathy Baker said, how did you get Meryl Streep to do, read your book? And she said, do you want to know how I got Meryl Streep to do my book? I asked Meryl Streep to do my book. And there was like, people were like, oh, laughing. And she said, I reached out to my friend. I forget if it was Stanley Tucci or Emily, one of the two, because Emily had done Devil Wears Prada and Stanley. So she reached out to one of them whose agent was Meryl Streep's agent or something.
Okay.
And so she sent Meryl Streep this query, and she said, hi, I wrote this book. I thought of you, I thought you'd be wonderful to read it because it's about a mother who's also an actress, and her daughter's an actress. And so she said, Meryl Streep got back to me almost immediately and said, I'd love to do your book. And she said, well, do you want to read it first? And she said, no, I read other your stuff before. I trust you. I'm in. And she said, so that was that. Yeah.
How wonderful are people? I mean, people are just people, and I love that. What a great story.
So now with your writing skills and your track record, and maybe just reference Ann Patchett and just say, my friend Ann, who I regularly write to, and mentioned I'd heard of, and no, I'm serious. I was like, and like just slip her a PDF and say, what do you think about this for you? I mean, listen, everybody needs a good role.
It can't hurt. I mean, I think she would be brilliant. I think
I agree 100%. Like I was going through those women and I was like, it could be Glenn Close, but Meryl Streep was the first one I thought of. But certainly, what a role.
That would really beat all. Beat all.
Yeah. Well, Virginia, this has been so lovely. Go out and get The Correspondent. Buy independent if you can, but check it out on audio or the book. Congratulations. It's so beautiful, and have your tissues ready.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.